The auditorium buzzed with proud chatter and camera flashes as families clustered around their graduating seniors. I sat alone in my navy cap and gown, scanning the crowd for a familiar face that I knew wouldn't appear. My diploma felt hollow in my hands, a paper shield against the words still ringing in my ears from last night. Too dumb to succeed, my father had announced at the family dinner table, his voice carrying that military precision that always made me flinch. Not a single Ivy League acceptance. Not even waitlisted. Walter Carter, retired lieutenant colonel, had gathered our extended family to celebrate my graduation. Instead, he'd conducted a public execution of my self-worth. The Carters have a legacy, he continued, swirling his whiskey as Aunt Miranda and Uncle Paul exchanged uncomfortable glances. 3 generations of excellence. And then there's Marine, who couldn't even get into Cornell with legacy status. I'd stared at my plate, 17 years of similar moments suddenly crushing down on me. The time he'd torn up my B+ history paper because Carters don't celebrate mediocrity. The chess tournaments where nothing less than first place earned a ride home without a lecture. The constant reminders that I was disappointing the family name with every imperfect step. Now, watching other families embrace their graduates, I placed my diploma in my bag and slipped out early. My mother had died when I was 8, breast cancer, and since then it had just been me and Walter. Me and the man who saw every one of my achievements as a failing waiting to be exposed. Back at home, I curled up on my bed, still in my graduation gown. The house was empty. Walter had taken the family out to dinner. I hadn't been invited. I flicked on the TV for background noise, something to drown out the thoughts swirling in my head. A woman's confident voice caught my attention, a special on self-made entrepreneurs. I started with nothing but $50 and a library card, she was saying, her eyes fierce with conviction. Everyone has a story about why they can't succeed. But your story isn't finished yet. You get to write the next chapter. I sat up slowly, something stirring in my chest, not quite hope, but its distant cousin. Determination, maybe. The faintest spark of rebellion. Watch me, I whispered to my empty room, to my absent father, to the universe that had watched me shrink for 17 years. Just watch me. I slid open my nightstand drawer and pulled out a leather-bound journal my mother had given me for my 8th birthday, just weeks before she passed. The pages were still blank. I'd never felt worthy of marking them. Now I uncapped a pen and wrote the date, followed by a single sentence. Today, I choose my own story. 5 years later, I surveyed my cramped studio apartment, calculating which bill could be delayed this month. At 22, I was juggling a morning shift at a coffee shop and evening hours at a call center. The space between those jobs and the precious hours after midnight belonged to my education, not college. Walter had made it clear he wouldn't waste money on community college. Polishing a brick doesn't make it gold, and my savings had been depleted after my first failed attempt at independence. Marine's Designs. A handcrafted jewelry business that had earned me exactly $347 over 6 months before collapsing. So you're a failed business owner now? Walter had sneered when he ran into me at the grocery store. From disappointing student to disappointing entrepreneur. At least you're consistent. The memory stung freshly as I hunched over my second-hand laptop, the glow illuminating notebooks filled with my cramped handwriting. For months, I'd been teaching myself digital marketing, e-commerce strategies, supply chain logistics, anything I could absorb from free online courses, YouTube tutorials, and library books. My apartment was barely functional, a mattress on the floor, a salvage desk that wobbled unless I propped one leg with a book, and a single chair I'd found discarded on the street. The walls were bare except for a small photo of my mother and a handwritten list of goals I'd taped above my desk. Not dreams, goals. Dreams were for people with safety nets. That night, scrolling through success stories at 2 a.m., I found myself on a forum where small business owners shared their journeys. One post caught my eye, how I built a 6-figure e-commerce store selling products I never touch. Dropshipping. A business model where I could create an online store without managing inventory. I could design a brand, market products manufactured by others, and focus on what I was learning to do best. Understand what people wanted and how to reach them. I stared at my bank account. $546.32. Rent was due in 2 weeks. A goal without a deadline is just a dream, I told myself, echoing one of the countless business podcasts I'd absorbed during call center shifts. I opened a new document and typed. Goal, 6-figure business by age 30 starting investment, $500 focus, eco-friendly home goods. I hit save, then transferred $500 to a new business account. The remaining $46.32 would have to feed me until payday. As my finger hovered over the confirm button for my new website domain, Economist Home, a familiar voice echoed in my head. Too dumb to succeed. I clicked confirm anyway. Morning light filtered through the thin curtains as I finally crawled into bed. For the first time in years, sleep came easily, dreamless and deep. When my alarm blared 3 hours later, I didn't feel the usual dread. Something had shifted, a small seed of purpose had been planted. At the coffee shop, as I steamed milk and called out orders, my mind raced with possibilities. Between customers, I jotted notes on napkins, product ideas, marketing angles, names for collections. My manager noticed. "You seem different today," she remarked. "Something happened?" I hesitated, then smiled. "I started a business last night." She raised her eyebrows. "Another one? After the jewelry thing?" "This one's different," I said, surprising myself with my certainty. "This one's going to work." "Yes, ma'am. I completely understand your frustration. I'll personally make sure a replacement bamboo organizer is shipped out today," I said into my phone, jotting down notes while simultaneously updating my inventory spreadsheet. It was 6:30 a.m. on a Sunday, my supposed day off from both official jobs, but Economist Home didn't recognize weekends. Neither did disappointed customers or supply chain issues or algorithm changes that threatened to bury my products in search results. 3 years into my business journey, I'd settled into a rhythm of perpetual exhaustion. My social life was non-existent. Dating was a foreign concept. Even my apartment remained Spartan. I'd upgraded to a real bed frame, but that was my biggest splurge. The walls were still bare except for my growing vision board and a calendar packed with deadlines and goals. Every penny of profit went back into the business. Better product photography, small Facebook ad campaigns, packaging improvements. I'd quit the call center 6 months ago, taking the terrifying leap to part-time at the coffee shop and part-time entrepreneur. That morning, after resolving the customer issue, I checked my monthly revenue report with trembling hands. For the first time, Economist had crossed the $10,000 threshold in monthly sales. After expenses, I'd made just over $3,000 in profit, more than I'd ever earned in a month at both previous jobs combined. I wanted to call someone to share the milestone with anyone. But there was no one. My few friends from high school had drifted away when I couldn't make time for them. I hadn't dated since a brief relationship my first year out of high school. Walter and I spoke only when absolutely necessary, usually at the insistence of my grandmother during holidays. My phone buzzed with a text. "Speak of the devil. Walter, heard from your cousin you're running a business now. Selling knickknacks online isn't a career. When are you going to grow up and get a real job?" I stared at the message until the screen went dark. Then I turned to the small vision board I'd created above my desk, magazine cutouts of successful women entrepreneurs, quotes about perseverance, and in the center, the number $1 million written in bold red marker. Tears blurred my vision as I whispered to the empty room, "I'm not done yet." I wiped my eyes and picked up my phone again. Not to respond to Walter, but to open my task management app. Today's list was already daunting. Respond to 27 customer service emails, finalize product descriptions for the new collection, troubleshoot a shipping integration issue, and create content for the week's social media posts. The loneliness was a luxury I couldn't afford. Not when each minute represented potential growth or failure. By midnight, I'd crossed off every task and added 12 more for tomorrow. My eyes burned from screen time and my shoulders ached from hunching over my laptop. But as I finally crawled into bed, a quiet satisfaction settled over me. This exhaustion felt different from the draining fatigue of my service jobs. This tiredness had purpose. As sleep pulled me under, I thought about Walter's text. What would he say if he knew I was on track to match his lieutenant colonel's salary by the end of next year? The thought brought a small smile to my lips as consciousness faded. 6 months later, I placed my coffee shop apron in my manager's hands. "You sure about this?" she asked, concern in her eyes. "Your little company." "It's not so little anymore," I interrupted gently. "We did $23,000 last month." Her eyes widened. "We?" "Still just me," I admitted. But not for long. That evening, I posted my first job listing for an assistant. As applications rolled in far more than I'd expected, I felt a strange mix of pride and imposter syndrome. Who was I to employ someone else? What if this growth was temporary? What if I failed not just myself but someone who depended on me for their livelihood? Walter's voice echoed in my head. too dumb to succeed. I pushed it away and opened the first application. 2 weeks later, Sarah joined Econist Home as my part-time customer service assistant. Bright, efficient, and enthusiastic about sustainable products, she freed up hours of my day to focus on growth strategy. Within 3 months, sales had increased by 40%. "This packaging issue with the bamboo supplier needs your attention," Sarah said one afternoon, placing a folder on my desk, my real desk, in my upgraded one-bedroom apartment that now had a dedicated office area. And that influencer we've been courting finally responded. She wants to feature our kitchen organizers in her spring cleaning series. I nodded, making notes. Draft a response and let's offer her our premium package as a gift. I paused, noticing Sarah lingering. Something else. She hesitated. I wanted to say thank you. This job, working for a company that actually cares about sustainability with a boss who values my input, it's rare. I'm learning so much. Her words caught me off guard. In my relentless pursuit of growth, I hadn't stopped to consider what Econist meant beyond my personal redemption project. To Sarah, this wasn't about proving Walter wrong. It was about building something meaningful. That night, I revised my business plan, adding a new section, company values and culture. For the first time, I allowed myself to think beyond survival and validation. What kind of leader did I want to be? What legacy did I want Econist to create? Not Walter's legacy of cold perfection and conditional worth. Something new. Something mine. Marine, have you seen this? My assistant, Jenna, my first full-time hire, who had replaced Sarah when she left for graduate school, burst into my office, phone extended. On the screen, a TikTok video played. A popular sustainability influencer with millions of followers was raving about our bamboo kitchen organization system while unpacking her weekly groceries. "This is literally the best storage solution I've ever found," the influencer gushed. "It's from this small company called Econist. I'll link it below, and it's changed my whole pantry game." "It's at 2.7 million views already," Jenna said, eyes wide. "And it's only been up for 3 hours. At 32, I'd grown Econist into a recognizable name in the sustainable home goods space. We'd expanded beyond dropshipping. I now had partnerships with ethical manufacturers who created exclusive designs for our brand. Our team had grown to 7 people working remotely, and last year we'd hit $850,000 in revenue. But nothing had prepared us for viral fame. Within 24 hours, our inventory was decimated. Within a week, we'd hit waitlist status on most products. By the end of the month, after pulling countless all-nighters to expedite manufacturing and secure faster shipping, Econist had processed just over $200,000 in orders. The growth was dizzying. With it came new challenges: scaling customer service, managing inventory forecasts, negotiating with manufacturers for faster production timelines, and the constant pressure to maintain quality while meeting unexpected demand. "We need more help," I admitted to Jenna one evening as we sat surrounded by takeout containers and spreadsheets. "This isn't sustainable, no pun intended." She smiled tiredly. "Maybe it's time to consider outside investment? We've had 3 different venture capital firms reach out since the TikTok explosion." I shook my head immediately. "No outside investors. This company stays mine." The words came automatically, fierce and certain. Jenna studied me. "Is this about control, or is it about proving something?" Her question caught me off guard. In 5 years of building Econist, I'd never shared the true motivation behind my drive with anyone. My employees knew me as determined, exacting, occasionally intense, but they didn't know about Walter, about the voice I was still trying to silence. "Both," I admitted finally. "I need to know I did this myself." She nodded slowly. "Then we find another way." "But Marine, you need to know you've already proven yourself. To everyone except maybe yourself." Her words followed me home that night, echoing as I paced my apartment, no longer Spartan, but tastefully furnished with sustainable pieces, many from Econist's own collections. On my walls hung framed milestones: our first $100,000 month, features in sustainability magazines, a thank you letter from our manufacturing partner in Vietnam, whose community had benefited from our fair trade practices. External validation surrounded me. So why did Walter's voice still matter? 3 months later, I signed the lease on our first warehouse space, 4,000 square feet of concrete potential on the outskirts of the city. Standing in the empty space, listening to the echo of my footsteps, I felt a shift in perspective. This wasn't just about proving Walter wrong anymore. This was about building something that would outlast both his criticism and my need for vindication. Our team expanded to 15 full-time employees. I hired a warehouse manager, a marketing director, and a product development specialist. Together, we streamlined operations, launched 2 new product lines, and established Econist's first charitable initiative, providing sustainable home goods to low-income families transitioning from homelessness. 6 months after the warehouse lease signing, as I reviewed our quarterly financials with our newly hired CFO, the reality hit me: Econist had officially crossed the 7-figure threshold. I was a millionaire, at least on paper. That night, alone in my new apartment, a real adult place with actual furniture and artwork on the walls, I should have felt complete. Instead, I felt the same hollow ache that had been my companion since that graduation day 15 years ago. The money didn't matter. The nice apartment didn't matter. What burned inside me wasn't satisfied by numbers in a bank account. I needed something more profound. Recognition. Validation. Proof that I wasn't what Walter had always claimed, too dumb to succeed. The email arrived 3 days later. Dear Ms. Carter, on behalf of the National Association of Sustainable Enterprises, it is our pleasure to inform you that you have been selected as this year's recipient of the Breakthrough Entrepreneur Award. I read on, my heart pounding. A nationally televised ceremony. Recognition for building one of the fastest growing sustainable brands in the country. And the kicker, each honoree could invite family members to attend. My finger hovered over Walter's contact information, untouched for nearly 2 years. Did I want him there? Did I need him to see this? Yes, whispered the 17-year-old girl still living inside me. Yes, I do. You've checked the RSVPs 3 times already, Jenna noted, concern evident in her voice as she watched me refresh the event dashboard again. He confirmed last week. He's coming. I nodded, trying to appear casual while my stomach twisted into knots. The award ceremony was tomorrow evening, and Walter Carter had indeed RSVP'd that he would attend. I hadn't spoken to him directly, everything had been handled through formal invitations and the event system. I just want to make sure, I said, closing my laptop. What I didn't say was how many memories had been surfacing since I'd decided to invite him. The time I'd proudly shown him my science project in 3rd grade, only to have him point out every flaw until I threw it in the trash. The middle school debate tournament where I placed 2nd, and he'd commented only on the winner's superior technique. The 100 small ways he'd trained me to believe I wasn't enough. One memory cut deeper than the rest. I was 8, just weeks after my mother's funeral. I'd found her old recipe box and attempted to make her famous chocolate chip cookies. The kitchen was a disaster, and the cookies were burnt around the edges when Walter walked in. What is this mess? He demanded. I made Mommy's cookies, I'd said, offering the misshapen attempt. He'd looked at the cookie, then at me. Your mother was precise. Talented. These are sloppy. You need to understand, Marine, not everyone has what it takes to be exceptional. Your mother did. I do. But you. He'd shaken his head. You need to work harder than most just to be average. Now 26 years later, I checked my phone one more time. A text had arrived from an unfamiliar number, but the message signature made the sender clear. Don't embarrass yourself. Walter. 5 words that instantly transported me back to being that small, inadequate girl. I set down the phone and looked around my hotel suite. My acceptance speech lay on the desk, carefully crafted and rehearsed. My dress for tomorrow, a simple but elegant emerald gown, hung by the closet. I whispered to the empty room. Sleep evaded me that night. I tossed in the luxury hotel bedding, rehearsing my speech, imagining Walter's reaction, preparing for every possible scenario. By morning, dark circles shadowed my eyes, but adrenaline kept me sharp as my team arrived to help prepare. Hair and makeup are here, Jenna announced, ushering in 2 stylists laden with equipment. As they worked, transforming me into a polished version of myself, I caught glimpses of my mother in the mirror, her high cheekbones, her determined chin. What would she think of me now? Would she be proud? Or would she, like Walter, find me lacking? You look incredible, Jenna said when they finished, her voice unusually soft. Seriously, Marine. Like a boss. I studied my reflection. The emerald dress complemented my olive skin and dark hair, now swept into an elegant updo. Subtle makeup enhanced my features without masking them. I looked confident. Successful. Worthy. Thanks, I said, reaching for my clutch. Let's do this. The drive to the International Convention Center passed in a blur. As our car joined the line of arrivals, I spotted cameras capturing the entrance of each honoree. This was real. This was happening. Remember, Jenna said as the car pulled to the entrance, this night isn't about him. It's about you and what you've built. I nodded, squeezed her hand briefly, then stepped out into the flashing lights. The International Convention Center ballroom glittered with carefully orchestrated opulence. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light over circular tables filled with the nation's most successful entrepreneurs, investors, and business journalists. Cameras discreetly positioned throughout the room broadcasted the ceremony to business networks and streaming platforms. From my seat at the front table, I scanned the room until I found him. Walter Carter sat stiffly in his military-precise posture, wearing his formal dress uniform adorned with medals. His hair had grayed significantly since I'd last seen him, but his expression remained the same, evaluating, judging, finding fault. Our eyes met briefly across the room. He gave a curt nod, which I returned before looking away. The evening progressed through dinner and preliminary awards. I picked up my food, too nervous to eat, making small talk with fellow honorees while hyper-aware of Walter's presence across the room. Had he noticed the respect others showed me? Did he hear the chairman of the association praising Econost's innovative approach to sustainable manufacturing? You seem distracted, observed the woman beside me, CEO of a revolutionary clean energy startup. Pre-speech jitters? I smiled tightly. Something like that. I get it, she said. I gave my first TED Talk last year. Threw up twice backstage. She grinned. But here's the thing, we earned our place at this table. Remember that when you're up there. When the host announced the Breakthrough Entrepreneur Award category, my heart hammered against my ribs. The introduction video played on massive screens, my journey condensed into 60 carefully edited seconds, showing Econost's growth, our sustainable practices, our community impact. And the award goes to Marine Carter, founder and CEO of Econost Home. The applause washed over me as I stood, smoothing my dress with trembling hands. I'd rehearsed this moment 1,000 times, but as I approached the podium, I made a split-second decision. I folded my prepared speech and slipped it into my pocket. I looked out at the sea of faces, found Walter's, and began. When I was 17, someone very important to me said I was too dumb to succeed. My voice wavered slightly before finding its strength. For years, I believed it. That belief became a shadow that followed me everywhere, into classrooms, relationships, and eventually into my first failed business attempts. The room had fallen completely silent. What I've learned since then is that success isn't about proving you're smart enough. It's about being brave enough to keep going when everything tells you to stop. It's about building something that matters more than your own wounds. I told them about Econost's mission, sustainable products that made everyday eco-conscious living accessible. I thanked my team, my first customers, the manufacturers who took a chance on my small business. I spoke about the importance of creating business models that cared for both people and planet. The true measure of success isn't profit margins or growth curves, though ours are certainly impressive, I continued, gaining confidence. It's impact. It's the manufacturing communities in Southeast Asia where our fair trade partnerships have funded new schools. It's the thousands of American households reducing plastic waste through our products. It's the team we've built where every voice matters and everyone shares in our success. I paused, my eyes finding Walter again. He sat perfectly still, his expression unreadable. Finally, I said, my voice clear and steady, I want to thank those who didn't believe in me, especially those closest to me who were convinced I would fail. Your doubt was the fuel I never knew I needed. For the first time in my life, I saw something in Walter's eyes besides disappointment or judgment. He blinked rapidly, his jaw tight with emotion I couldn't fully identify. To anyone out there who's been told they're not enough, not smart enough, not talented enough, not whatever enough, I say this. Let them watch you rise. Thank you. The applause began slowly, then built into a thunder as people rose to their feet. Through blurred vision, I saw Walter standing too, his hands moving mechanically together, his expression unreadable from this distance. As I stepped off the stage, award in hand, I felt something shift inside me, a weight dissolving, a chain breaking. I didn't need to look at Walter again to know that I was finally completely free. The rest of the evening passed in a whirlwind of congratulations, networking, and interviews. When the ceremony concluded, I found myself surrounded by my team, champagne flowing as we celebrated. Walter had disappeared sometime during the after-party, slipped away without a word. It should have hurt. Instead, I felt relieved. Whatever closure I needed, I'd found it in those moments at the podium. I didn't need his approval or his congratulations. I'd finally truly stopped caring. Or so I thought. The morning after the ceremony, I sat in the hotel restaurant with my team, discussing next steps in reviewing media coverage of the awards. "You're trending on Twitter," Jenna announced, scrolling through her phone. "The speech clip has over 5 million views already." I nodded, trying to focus despite my exhaustion. Last night's adrenaline had given way to bone-deep fatigue, but we had a full day of meetings ahead before flying home. "Ms. Carter." A hotel staff member approached our table. "There's someone asking to see you in the lobby." "A Mr. Walter Carter." The table fell silent. Everyone knew enough about my background to understand the significance of this name. "I'll handle this," I said, standing. "Give me 15 minutes. Walter stood by the marble fountain in the center of the lobby, hands clasped behind his back in his familiar military stance. He'd changed from his dress uniform to civilian clothes, pressed slacks and a button-down shirt. Still impeccably neat. He looked older in daylight, more vulnerable somehow. "Marine," he said as I approached, his voice lacking its usual commanding tone. "Walter." I kept my distance, arms crossed. "I didn't expect to see you this morning." "Your speech." He cleared his throat. It was effective. Not good. Not moving or powerful. Effective. Classic Walter assessment. "Thank you," I said, waiting for the criticism that would inevitably follow. Instead, he looked away, studying the fountain. I wasn't a good father. The simple admission knocked the wind from me. In 34 years, I'd never heard Walter acknowledge a personal failing. "No," I agreed softly. "You weren't." He nodded once, accepting the truth without defense. "After your mother died, I didn't know how to raise you. You were so much like her, creative, sensitive. I thought." He paused. "I thought I needed to toughen you up. Prepare you for a world that wouldn't appreciate those qualities. By making sure I didn't appreciate them either?" The words came out sharper than intended. "By making sure you learned to fight," he corrected. "But I fought against you instead of for you." That was wrong. I studied his face, searching for manipulation or hidden agenda. There was none, just an old man facing the consequences of his failures. "Why are you telling me this now?" I asked. "Because last night I watched my daughter accept an award I never thought possible," he said simply. "And I realized I've been wrong about many things." We stood in silence, the fountain's gentle splash filling the space between us. This wasn't the confrontation I'd imagined, no dramatic accusations, no tearful reconciliation. Just two adults acknowledging a painful truth. "I'm proud of you," he said finally. "Not because of the award or the money. Because you did it your way, despite me." The words I'd craved my entire life landed differently than expected. Instead of vindication, I felt a strange emptiness. These words couldn't undo decades of damage. They couldn't give me back the confidence I'd fought so hard to build on my own. "Thank you for coming last night," I said. "And for telling me this. But I need to get back to my team." He nodded, understanding the dismissal. "Of course." As I turned to leave, he spoke again. "Marine? Your mother would be proud too. She always believed you were extraordinary." She was right. I walked away without responding, emotions too complicated to process in that moment. Back at the breakfast table, my team watched me expectantly. "Everything okay?" Jenna asked. I considered the question. Was it okay? Would it ever be? "It's moving in that direction," I said finally. "Now let's talk about next quarter's strategy. Ms. Carter, we're ready for you in 5 minutes." I nodded to the production assistant as I reviewed my notes one last time. 3 months had passed since the award ceremony, and life had transformed in ways I couldn't have anticipated. Major business publications wanted profiles. Fortune 500 companies sought partnerships. Econost's revenue had tripled. But the change that mattered most wasn't measured in dollars or fame. It was in the emails filling my inbox daily, messages from young entrepreneurs, especially women, who had seen my speech and found courage in my journey. Today's appearance on the nation's leading business podcast would focus on my newest initiative, the Carter Mentorship Program, providing resources and guidance to first-generation entrepreneurs from disadvantaged backgrounds. The irony of using the Carter name this way wasn't lost on me. A knock on my office door interrupted my preparation. "There's someone here to see you," my assistant said, looking uncomfortable. "He doesn't have an appointment, but he's quite insistent." "It's my father," I finished, recognizing the military posture visible through the glass partition. Walter Carter looked smaller somehow, standing awkwardly in the reception area of the offices I'd recently purchased in downtown Chicago. His medals were absent, his civilian clothes unfamiliar. 5 minutes, I told my assistant, who nodded and left us alone. Marine, Walter said, his voice lacking its usual commanding tone. Your office is impressive. Thank you. What brings you here? I have an interview soon. Yes, I know. I follow your schedule. He cleared his throat. I saw the announcement about the mentorship program. Using our name. I tensed, preparing for criticism. Yes. Is that why you're here? Walter seemed to struggle with his words, something I'd never witnessed before. Finally, he reached into his jacket and pulled out a small, worn photograph. Your mother, he said, handing it to me. At her college graduation. I looked down at the faded image. My mother, young and radiant in her cap and gown, beaming at the camera. She was like you, Walter continued. Creative. Determined. She built different things than you, but with the same spirit. I stared at him, uncertain where this was heading. When she died, his voice cracked slightly. I didn't know how to raise a daughter who reminded me so much of her. Every time you showed that same spark, it hurt. So I tried to. He trailed off. Extinguish it? I suggested, my voice carefully neutral. He nodded once, a sharp military gesture. I was wrong. You proved that. Another pause. The mentorship program. I'd like to contribute. Financially. I studied his face, the face that had haunted my dreams and driven my ambitions for so long. There was no manipulation there. No agenda. Just an old man facing the consequences of his failures. I'll have someone contact you about donation options, I said finally. He nodded again. Congratulations, Marine. You've built something remarkable. He turned to leave, then stopped. Your speech. It was well delivered. It was as close to an apology as Walter Carter would ever come. And somehow it was enough. After he left, I stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of my office, looking out at the city below. The trauma Walter had inflicted would always be part of my story, but it was no longer the story. I touched the photograph of my mother, seeing my own smile reflected in hers before carefully placing it on my desk. Then I picked up my notes and headed toward the studio, ready to tell my story again, not as the broken girl seeking validation, but as the woman who had found her own worth. My first mentee was waiting when I returned from the interview, a young woman from the South Side with a brilliant business concept and no connections to make it happen. As she nervously presented her ideas, I recognized the same hunger in her eyes that had driven me for so many years. The system isn't designed for people like us, she said, her voice gaining confidence as she spoke. No family connections, no trust funds, no safety nets. Then we build our own systems, I replied. Tell me more about your supply chain idea. Over the next year, the Carter Mentorship Program expanded to support 20 young entrepreneurs from underserved communities. Walter's substantial donation, anonymously given at my insistence, funded our first incubator space. Econ has continued its growth trajectory, with our team expanding to over 50 employees and our product line doubling. On the anniversary of the award ceremony, I received a package at my office. Inside was a small wooden box with a brass nameplate, Lieutenant Colonel Walter Carter, USMC, Ret. Within the box lay his most prized possessions, his combat medals, earned through decades of military service. The note read simply, "These belong to you now. You've earned them in your own battlefield." I closed the box gently and placed it on my shelf next to my own award. Not because I needed his validation anymore, but because I finally understood. Walter had given me what he thought was strength. It had taken me years to realize that my true strength came not from his pushing, but from my resistance to it. That evening, I updated the journal I'd started on graduation night, the one my mother had given me so many years ago. The pages were now filled with milestones, setbacks, triumphs, and reflections, a chronicle of my journey from broken girl to successful entrepreneur. I wrote, "Today marks 1 year since the award ceremony that changed everything, not because of the recognition itself, but because it forced a confrontation with my past that I'd been avoiding. Walter sent his medals today. A gesture that would have meant the world to me once. Now it feels like the closing of a chapter rather than the validation I once craved. The company has evolved beyond my wildest dreams. But more importantly, I've evolved. The voice in my head is finally my own, not his, not the critics, not the doubters. Just mine. And it says I am enough. I always was." 2 years later, I stood at the podium of my old high school auditorium, looking out at a sea of teenage faces. The principal had invited me to give the commencement address, an honor that felt surreal as memories flooded back of my own graduation day, sitting alone while other families celebrated. Success isn't a straight line, I told the graduates. It's not about perfect grades or prestigious colleges. It's about persistence when everything falls apart. It's about finding your own definition of excellence instead of chasing someone else's. In the back row, I spotted Walter. He hadn't told me he was coming, but somehow I wasn't surprised. We'd established a fragile truce over the past few years, occasional dinners, brief calls on holidays. Not forgiveness exactly, but a mutual acknowledgement of our shared history and separate paths forward. The world will try to define you, I continued. Parents, teachers, friends, society, they all have ideas about who you should be and what success looks like. Listen respectfully, then make your own choices anyway. After the ceremony, as families gathered for photos and congratulations, a young woman approached me clutching her diploma. Miss Carter? I did my senior business project on Economist, she said, nervous excitement in her voice. My dad says entrepreneurship isn't a real career path, especially for women, but your story changed my mind. I'm starting college in the fall, business major. Her words struck a chord so deep I nearly lost my composure. What's your name? I asked. Amelia, she replied. Amelia, take this. I reached into my purse and pulled out a business card with my personal email. When you're ready to start your first company, contact me. The Carter Mentorship Program will be waiting. Her eyes widened. Really? But don't you have a selection process or something? I smiled. Sometimes you just know when someone has what it takes. Trust me on this. As she walked away, clutching my card like a talisman, I felt Walter's presence before I saw him. That was generous, he said, hands in his pockets. That was necessary, I corrected. She needs someone to believe in her. He nodded, understanding the unspoken parallel. Your speech was excellent. Particularly the part about making your own choices. I had good material to work with, I said. We stood in awkward silence, surrounded by the chaos of graduation festivities. So many unspoken words between us, so much history. I have a dinner reservation, Walter finally said. If you care to join me. It wasn't an apology or a reconciliation. It was simply an invitation, one that, for the first time, came without expectations or judgment attached. I'd like that, I replied. During dinner, conversation moved carefully around our shared landmines. Walter asked about Econist's expansion into Europe. I inquired about his volunteer work with veterans. We discussed neutral topics, books, current events, the changing neighborhood around us. Then, over dessert, Walter set down his fork and looked at me directly. I've been seeing someone, he said. A therapist. The admission stunned me. Walter Carter, who believed psychology was excuse-making nonsense, was in therapy? It's been illuminating, he continued when I didn't respond. Particularly regarding my parenting. I set down my own fork, suddenly unable to eat. Oh, I was taught that excellence was binary, either you were the best or you were nothing. My father taught me that. His father before him. Walter's voice remained steady, but I detected unfamiliar vulnerability. I perpetuated the cycle without questioning it. That was wrong. Yes, I agreed softly. It was. I can't undo what I've done, he said. But I wanted you to know that I understand now. At least I'm trying to understand. It wasn't the Hollywood reconciliation moment, no tears, no dramatic embraces. Just a quiet acknowledgement between two adults that harm had been done, recognized, and perhaps someday could be healed. Thank you for telling me, I said. Later that night, back in my penthouse apartment overlooking the city, I reflected on how far we both come. The broken girl and the rigid father, both trapped in patterns we didn't create but had to break ourselves. I picked up my phone and drafted an email to my team. Subject: New Initiative Breaking Cycles Program. I want to explore expanding our mentorship focus to include programs specifically for parents and children from high-pressure backgrounds. Workshops on healthy achievement, communication skills, reframing success beyond competition. I paused, thinking about Walter's therapy revelation, about Amelia and her father, about my own journey. This isn't just about business anymore. It's about healing generational patterns that crush potential rather than nurture it. Let's discuss at Monday's meeting. 5 years after that graduation speech, Econist Home had transformed from a successful e-commerce brand into a movement. Our product lines had expanded into every area of sustainable living. Our manufacturing innovations had revolutionized eco-friendly production in 3 countries. Our corporate campus, built from reclaimed materials and powered entirely by renewable energy, had won architectural awards for sustainable design. But the achievement I valued most was the Carter Foundation, which had grown from a small mentorship program into a comprehensive support system for first-generation entrepreneurs from disadvantaged backgrounds. We'd launched over 200 businesses, created nearly 1,000 jobs, and built resilient economic ecosystems in communities that had long been overlooked. On a crisp autumn morning, I stood on stage again, this time at the groundbreaking ceremony for the Carter Center for Entrepreneurial Innovation, a state-of-the-art incubator space being built on Chicago's South Side. This center represents the true purpose of success, I told the gathered crowd of community members, business leaders, and media. Not accumulation, but circulation. Not achievement for its own sake, but achievement that lifts others as it rises. In the front row sat our foundation's first cohort of mints, now successful entrepreneurs themselves, many of whom had returned as mentors. Behind them, my executive team, who had helped build Econist into the powerhouse it had become. And at the end of the second row, Walter, now retired from all his activities, his health beginning to fail but his eyes still sharp as he watched the proceedings. 10 years ago, I started a business with $500 and a desperate need to prove my worth, I continued. Today, I understand that worth was never the question. The question was always purpose. What do we do with our talents, our resources, our influence? How do we ensure that our success creates pathways for others rather than obstacles? After the ceremony, as attendees mingled over coffee and sustainable pastries from one of our mentees' bakeries, I found myself standing beside Walter as we surveyed the architectural renderings of the new center. Impressive, he said, studying the plans. Your mother would have loved this. She always believed business should serve something greater than profit. I know, I replied. I found her journals after you sent me her things last year. She wrote about it extensively. Walter nodded, leaning more heavily on his cane than he had even a few months ago. She was the visionary. I was just the strategist. It takes both, I said quietly. Vision without strategy remains a dream. Strategy without vision becomes purposeless efficiency. He glanced at me, surprise briefly crossing his features. When did you get so wise? I had complicated teachers, I replied, allowing a small smile. Later that evening, as the sun set over the city, I sat in my office completing my annual tradition, updating the journal my mother had given me. 20 years of entries chronicled my journey from broken girl to confident woman, from struggling entrepreneur to industry leader. I wrote, "Today we broke ground on the center, a physical manifestation of everything I've come to believe about success and purpose." Walter attended, friendlier than before but still carrying himself like the military man he'll always be. We've found a kind of peace these past few years, not the close father-daughter relationship some might expect from a reconciliation story, but something real and honest. We acknowledge the past without letting it define our present. Sometimes I wonder who I would have become without those early wounds, without the desperate need to prove him wrong. Would Econist exist? Would the foundation have helped so many? There's no way to know. Trauma shaped me, but I refuse to let it define me. The true measure of success isn't in proving critics wrong, though that has its satisfactions. It's in creating something that matters more than your wounds, something that transforms pain into purpose. It's in breaking cycles rather than perpetuating them. 10 years ago, I whispered, "Watch me," to an empty room. Today, I whisper it to the future we're building together, a future where worth isn't proven but recognized, where excellence includes compassion, where success means more than personal triumph. The broken girl became a builder, and what she built was stronger than what broke her. I closed the journal and looked out at the skyline, city lights twinkling like stars fallen to earth. In another life, one where Walter had been different, where my path had been easier, I might never have discovered my strength or my purpose. That acknowledgement didn't excuse his behavior or romanticize the pain. It simply recognized that we are all shaped by our struggles, defined by how we respond to them. Econist's journey had begun with $500 and something to prove. It had evolved into a mission that transcended my personal validation. The company, the foundation, the center, they would continue beyond me, creating opportunities and breaking cycles for generations to come. That, I realized, was the legacy I truly wanted, not the Carter legacy of cold perfection and conditional worth, but something warmer, more inclusive, more human. A legacy that recognized how easily we wound each other and how much stronger we are when we heal together. The words I'd spoken at 17 had manifested in ways I could never have imagined. The world had indeed watched me rise. But more importantly, I had watched myself transform, from a girl desperate for validation into a woman who understood that true success wasn't about proving others wrong. It was about proving yourself right.